Hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're calling in today, and welcome. I'm so happy to be hosting this webinar today all about eye blinks. This webinar will be recorded, so feel free to rewatch or share with students and colleagues. A link to the webinar recording will be sent via email to everyone who registered within a few days. We also have hosted other webinars like this in the past, which can be found on our Toby Resource Center, and this webinar will also be hosted there in the future. Here is our agenda for today. First, I will provide an overview of blink metrics, why we study them, and how to access blink data. Then we will be joined by Dr. Marcus Nyström, who's an associate professor from Lund University in Sweden. His research interests include visual perception and cognition, learning, eye movements, and eye tracking, all with an interdisciplinary focus. He also works on developing techniques and methods to standardize and improve the validity of eye movement data. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so please feel free to ask questions in the questions box in the GoToWebinar section throughout the presentation as they come up, and we will address them all at the end. Okay, let's get started. What is a blink? We blink all the time and probably don't even think about it. A blink is the temporary closure of both eyes involving movements of the upper and lower eyelids. A blink consists of three phases: the closing phase, the opening phase, and the interphase pause, which is the time between the end of the closing phase and the beginning of the opening phase. There are many different types of blinks. Spontaneous blinks occur unconsciously but periodically without any stimuli. Voluntary blinks are intentional. Reflexive blinks occur in response to external, maybe injurious stimuli, dust in your eyes, or something coming towards your eyes. Twitch blinks are small, almost undetectable movements of the upper eyelid. Incomplete blinks or microblinks are where the upper eyelid covers less than 2/3 of the cornea, so it descends partially but doesn't fully occlude the eye. And a complete blink is where the upper eyelid moves at least 2/3 to cover the cornea. There are lots of different parameters of blinks that are important to know. Fetuses do blink, usually less than 3 blinks per minute. Children blink between 6 to 8 blinks per minute, and adults blink a lot more frequently, typically 16 to 20 blinks per minute when they're alert. Blink rate decreases when adults are drowsy. Interblink intervals are how long the eyes stay open between blinks. Usually they are between half a second to 2 seconds, but sometimes the interblink interval can be longer. The blink duration is how long are the eyes open or closed. Most blinks are between 150 and 400 milliseconds, where the eyes are completely closed for about 50 milliseconds. The blink amplitude is how far the eyelid moves from the starting position to where the eyes are fully closed. Usually the range is from 10 degrees to 60 degrees, and this amplitude decreases with age. Since the eyelids do not necessarily return to the same position after a blink, the up movement and the down movement of the blink might have different amplitudes. So the primary reasons why we blink are physiological: to moisten the surface of the eyeball, to remove dirt from the eyes, to prevent the eyes from injury or external impact, or to protect against continuous exposure to light. However, blinks are also really informative of cognition and cognitive development. So this is the primary reason why blinks have been studied in a variety of research fields. Spontaneous blinks are linked to dopamine activity. In this case, spontaneous blink rate is associated positively to striatal dopamine receptor availability. So more dopamine is released, and that's related to more spontaneous blinking. Because of this relationship between blink rate and dopamine, spontaneous blinks can be used and measured to assess brain pathologies in which normal dopamine levels are affected. So blinks can give you insights into clinical conditions. First, you can use blinks to assess eyelid movement related dysfunctions like dry eye disease, blepharospasm, or progressive supranuclear palsy. But you can also assess hypodopaminergic conditions like reduced blink rate that you see in Parkinson's, ADHD, or addictive behaviors. You can also assess clinical conditions that have an increased blink rate, hyperdopaminergic, like schizophrenia or autism. And here are a variety of citations for studies about those. Spontaneous blinks can also be related to cognition and behavior. For instance, exploitation versus exploration. So people with higher blink rates are more likely to explore different possibilities, while those with lower blink rates stick to familiar, rewarding choices. You can also use spontaneous blinks to measure focus, motivation-driven attention, working memory, inhibitory control, creative thinking, or even time perception. So for instance, in this study, they found that higher blink rates give the impression that time passes more slowly than it actually does. It actually dilates the time perception. You can also use spontaneous blinks to measure driver drowsiness. So spontaneous blinks can be an indicator for fatigue or drowsiness. And you can use the characteristics of eyelid movements to calculate percentage of eye closure or per close, spontaneous blink rate, eyelid opening and duration and speed, as well as this amplitude or amplitude velocity ratio. So traditionally, eyelid position has been estimated directly or indirectly through a variety of attachment devices such as electrooculography, EOG, or magnetic search coil. But now the most common method is from video-based eye trackers. So this is how we classify blinks in our Tobii systems. Tobii systems are comprised of several components. We have cameras taking pictures of the eyes and the face, near-infrared illuminators that shine a pattern of light onto the eyes, and the algorithms that find the geometric configuration of the pupil center between the corneal reflections and the eye. Previous algorithms have actually measured blinks from pupil size, which is data retrieved from Tobii eye trackers. We also have an eye openness signal. The eye openness is the diameter of the largest sphere that can be fitted between the upper and lower eyelid. It's this measured in millimeters, so you can see here how it looks. And the upper and lower eyelids are defined by the contrast lines between the sclera and the lashes and lid structure. This eye openness signal has many uses, and we have a great blog post written on our website about it. A recent paper by Dr. Nystrom and his colleagues has addressed the challenges of detailed blink detection by introducing an alternative method that estimates eye opening directly. This is actually what we're going to be hearing about in a moment from Dr. Nystrom. But before we get there to how the algorithm was created, if you are interested in using our eye openness signal and measuring blinks, you can use the Tobii Pro Spectrum with the firmware version 2.6.1 or Tobii Pro Fusion with a runtime version 2.5.4. So these are the two hardware models that will provide you the measurements of eye openness in millimeters. You can also use our Tobii Pro Lab software. And we just launched last week our eye openness-based blink algorithm. It will be in Tobii Pro Lab software version 24.21. It's out now. If you're a current Tobii customer and have an updated software update contract with Tobii Pro Lab, you can update this now. If you don't have this, but you're interested, I'll give you the information to contact our sales team later, and they can give you pricing for updating to our latest version, Tobii Pro Lab. This is what you'll get with Tobii Pro Lab. So obviously you get all the fixation-related data, gaze-related data, fixation, durations, counts, and latency, saccade count, direction, velocity, amplitude, and more. But you also get eye-related biometrics, both in visualization form and in metrics exports. You get pupil diameter measurements in millimeters. It's also shown as this graph here below. You get eye openness, also in millimeters, also shown, visualized here. And then you get blinks, both latency, count, duration, and more. This is what the metrics exports look like. You have number of blinks, latency, duration, opening phase, closing phase, as well as amplitude. Inter-eye blink intervals, phase durations, phase amplitude, and phase peak velocities. So without further ado, we'll move right on to Dr. Nystrom, who will be showing data from their recent study comparing blink metrics with pupil versus eye openness data. And I am very excited to invite Dr. Nystrom to present now.
Thank you very much. So let me first try to share my screen and my presentation. So great to be here, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to talk about blinks and an algorithm we developed. And if you want to read more about this, there's a published article about the work that I've done together with my colleagues both here in Lund and in Utrecht and at Tobii. And so we already heard there are many good reasons to record blinks and investigate blinks. For example, that they're related to pharmacological manipulations, cognitive processes, clinical conditions. But not only look at the rate and the duration of blinks, but also eyelid dynamics could be relevant to look at. For example, when you look at the workload or sleepiness studies, so they slow down a bit the eyelids when you become a bit sleepy. So if you want to know more about this, there's really an excellent paper by Eckstein et al. That really goes deep into this. So in the next slide, I'm going to show you a video. It's a video of an eye that is blinking. So while this video is playing, you can think about how many blinks are in this video. So let's go. And I'll be quiet while you're counting blinks. There was one run of the video. I'll run it again. Okay. So probably now I can't interact with you much, but maybe you can write in the chat a bit later. But usually when I show this video, I get anywhere from 2 to 5 blinks. And it's kind of hard to agree on this. So what is a blink? So I turned to the literature to find out what is a blink and how people have operationalized blinks. And I found this. So there is a blink, wink, half blink, flicker, flink, small blink, twitch blink. So there are a bunch of blink terminology out there. And on the left-hand side, you have the names that I found in the literature, and on the right-hand side, you have the papers where these terms are used. And in the top also, you can see which features of the eyes are used in these definitions. So as you can see here, most or all actually, all of these blink types mention the eyelid in some sense. But you can also see that some mention the pupil, cornea, iris, eyeball, for example, how much of the pupil needs to be covered. In the video, you saw that some of the blinks covered the pupil completely, whereas other blinks cover the pupil partially. And there are also blinks that do not cover the pupil at all. So that's been used in some type of blinks definitions. And there is also a column related to eyeball. So a blink is considered to happen only when the eyeball retracts into the socket, for example. And there are also space and time requirements. So the blinks need to be of a certain duration or a certain amplitudes, and they can also be monocular and binocular. So I thought I knew something about blinks, but then when I actually looked into the literature, I was surprised how many definitions and how many types there are out there. So people who use video-based eye trackers these days, as Marissa mentioned, usually use the pupil size signal to operationalize and classify blinks. So how is this done? On the left-hand side, you can see an eye that is closing, and this corresponds to the pupil size signal looking like this. So we have time on the x-axis in milliseconds and pupil diameter in millimeters on the y-axis. So the eye is first open, the eyelid closes rapidly, and it looks like the pupil is constricting very quickly. That is, of course, an artifact of the eye tracker. And then we have a period of data loss, and then the eye reopens again very quickly. And then we have an open eye. So typically then a blink is defined as the period of data loss, sometimes a bit more, a bit before the blink starts and a bit after the blink ends or the pupil disappears. And if you have another way to classify blinks is to use an eye opener signal. So that's basically what Marissa just introduced. So something that estimates the distance between the upper and the lower part of the eyelid. And as you can see here again, time is on the x-axis, and here eye openness is on the y-axis. So here a fully open eye corresponds to an eye openness about 1 centimeters, and then we can very in detail follow the eyelid closure and eyelid opening. And of course, this is clear from this signal that it contains more information about the blink than the pupil size signal. So already now, just by looking at the signal, we can tell that if you want to know more details about blinks, probably the eye opener signal is more useful than the pupil size signal. And then to actually classify the blink, there are different ways to do that. I'm going to talk about the way we do it a bit later, but you have some blink with a start and end duration. And one partial goal of this work that I'm presenting here is to develop a new algorithm for the detection of eye openness blinks. And we had some specific research questions coming into this research. First of all, does it matter at all whether researchers use this pupil size or detect blinks from the pupil size signals and the eye openness signal? And maybe it doesn't matter at all. So that was the first research question. And if remote eye trackers are used, participants can move in front of these eye trackers, and therefore we also wanted to know if eye openness blinks and pupil size blinks are what happens when you move around in a headbox, because at certain positions in the headbox, we know that already, the data quality becomes a bit worse. So does that matter where we are in the headbox when we blink? So we thought about the simplest possible test of this. So we designed 3 conditions here. We put participants very close to the eye tracker, in the center of the headbox where you have the highest data quality, and far away from the eye tracker. So 3 conditions, and we recorded eye openness and pupil size with the Tobii Pro eye tracker. And it looked like this. So this yellow circle you can see is an indication of where you are in the headbox. So and you can see the nose of the participant here on the left-hand side. It's actually me. And every time that the dot in the center changes color from black to white, the participant is asked to blink. And after that was done, we asked the participant to move a bit closer to the eye tracker. And here you can see the yellow circle there is flickering. So this is indicating that you're really at the edge of the headbox where you expect the data quality to be worse. And then you repeat the same task again. And once you've done that, we recorded the last conditions where you move as far back as you can while you're still being tracked by the eye tracker. So you can see again, moving far back, but until this head, the yellow circle, which is an indication of where the head is in the head box, starts flickering. And then I repeat the task again. So that's basically the very, very simple test we do. We had 12 participants. We used the Tobii Pro Spectrum, and we had participants blink 60 seconds in each of 3 conditions. So basically, we expect to have 60 blinks for each conditions. And participant blink 1 time per second. And if you want to test this yourself, the blink detector that we developed is publicly available on GitHub. So you can just download and test it yourself. So what does it look like, the signals that we got? This is an example of the signals. So we have time on the x-axis in milliseconds, diameter on the y-axis. So that's the diameter of the circle that is fit between the upper and the lower eyelid. That's why we can call that the diameter too. So the eye openness is about 8 millimeters for this participant's eye when it's fully open. And then we can clearly see the blinks here. So eyelid closure, eyelid opening, that's what it looks like in the eye opener signal. And then we can see the characteristic data loss in the pupil size signal. As you can see here, the pupil size blinks are a bit shorter than the eye openness blinks in this particular implementation of the algorithms. So the pupil size blink algorithm is just a standard blink algorithm that's based on finding portions of data loss in the signal. So if we return to our specific research questions, we were interested in this, in particular blink rate and durations. So does it matter if you use the pupil size signal or the eye opener signal? And so you have the pupil size signal, the rate of blinks in the pupil size signal on the x-axis, and the rate of blinks in the eye opener signal on the y-axis. And what we would expect if they gave us exactly the same result, all the points would lay on this diagonal. And since we know that people are blinking at 1 Hertz, we would expect all the points from all participants and eye to lay within this 1 Hertz circle. And this is what we actually found. So each dot represents the average blink rate for one participant and eye. We recorded both eyes. So there's supposed to be 24 dots. So we have 2 participants and each participant and 2 eyes. And as you can see here, most points are located in the circle. There are a few also a bit lower down. So this could mean that the participants did not understand the instruction or not capable of blinking at 1 Hertz. And there were also 1 point off the circle. But in general, the agreement between pupil size blinks and eye openness blinks was very, very high. And of course, the rate could be similar, but do they overlap? Well, then we turn to an overlap measure called the F1 score, where 1 is a perfect overlap, and you can see the value is very close to 1. So that means that the blinks in the eye opener signal and the pupil size signal overlapped almost perfectly. So this is data for the center of the head box where the data quality is the best. So if you look at blink durations, we already saw that the blinks are a bit longer in the eye opener signal. And that's what is verified here also in the blink duration plot. They're a bit longer on average, and otherwise quite similar. And then if we look at the edge of the head box, what do we find there? Well, the predictions are the same. If everything works, we would expect all the points to lay on this diagonal and be centered around 1 Hertz. This is what it looks like. It's a bit more disperse, but in general, if you look at this overlap measure, we still have a very, very high overlap. And I just want to show you a few examples where things did not overlap. Here's one example where we can see that there is a clear eyelid movement in the eye opener signal, but it probably does not, or is not large enough to cover the pupil. So in the pupil, there is just a small disturbance in the signal, but not enough to trigger a data loss. So that's one example when they do not agree, blinks are found in the pupil size signals and the eye opener signals. The other example looks like this. So here we can see that blinks are too long in the pupil size signals because data are missing over an extended period of time here, whereas in the eye opener signal is not only data loss, but we actually have a signal, so we can more reliably detect the blinks. In the third portion, in the third example, there is data loss that I don't know why that occurs, but you can see there are holes in the signal where according to the eye opener signal, there should not be data loss. And finally, in the fourth signal, there is a portion of data loss that is in the eye opener signal and then the blink detection in the eye opener signal fails. So it's that proportion of data loss is so long that we don't know if another blink, for example, happened within that period of data loss. So we can't really say what it is. And of course, now I talked about blink rate and duration. What is the most useful thing about the new eyelid eye opener signals is you can quantify dynamic aspects of eye opening. For example, we can plot the amplitude versus the peak velocity. And these are just examples of what you can do. And the amplitude against the duration also. And in the paper, you can read that the results we got for these dynamic eyelid measures corresponded quite well to what they found previously in the literature. So if I return to my research questions I asked in the end, does it matter if you use pupil size blinks or eye openness blinks? In terms of rate, it does not matter too much. IO blinks, in terms of duration, IO blinks are a bit longer. So it kind of depends. In absolute terms, it matters, but in relative terms, which is maybe usually what you compare in research paradigms, that you compare two conditions, it does not matter that much. Blinks detected from the pupil size signal, and in particular the eye openness signals, are robust to reductions in data quality. So that means that we can move around in the head box, and the results are quite reasonable. And we also saw that the eye openness signal is probably a bit more robust to where you are in the head box. So the reduction in data quality is smaller for the eye open signal compared to the pupil size signal. And finally, that if you use the eye opener signal, you can of course compute measures that you can't just use in the pupil size signal, since you know where the since you have this very sensitive measure of exactly the eye openness at all times. So before I end this talk, I just want to say something about the algorithm. So the algorithm is a very, very simple algorithm based on similar principles as saccade detection. So the algorithm is, so here we can see an eye opener signal. We start by finding the peaks in the signal. After the peak is found, the algorithm searches backwards and forwards until a certain velocity threshold is met. So that's a basic functionality, and of course there are a lot of details also that you can read about in the paper. And there are a bunch of measures that this algorithm spits out. For example, the onset, offset, duration, where the maximum velocity is reached, and the amplitude of the closing and opening part of each blink. And again, if you want to know more, just feel free to look at the GitHub page and download the code and try it out yourself. So it's based on Python. Thanks a lot.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Marcus. That was great. Let me share my screen again. Looks like we're getting lots of applause. Thank you all for paying attention and for our great questions. I've already seen that there are some questions coming through. So please keep those questions coming in. We're going to get started in just a moment. But first, you'll see on the screen 3 different QR codes. These are for some of our white papers that we have available on our Tobii Resource Center. You can use your phone to scan these QR codes, or you can search engine the names of these. We have eye tracking in human factors, eye tracking in neurology and psychiatry, and eye tracking window to cognitive processes. And we will always have more white papers coming out. Before we get to the questions that you all have been asking, I will also ask you some questions. So for everyone in the audience, the first question is, have you used eye tracking in your research? The answers are yes, I currently use eye tracking. Yes, I have in the past, but I'm not currently using it, and not yet. So for everyone who's in the audience, just take a moment. We'd love to know about you as we're presenting to you. Just give you a few more seconds. And while you're doing that, there are 2 more QR codes on this screen. The one on the left where it says reach out and talk to Tobii Expert is how you can contact us, both on our sales team. If you have questions, if you're not using eye tracking currently but you want to, please feel free to reach out to sales. And if you are a current customer of Tobii, you can contact our technical support through our Connect portal, connect.tobii.com. Okay, awesome. We'll share these results. So most of you use eye tracking currently, whether you use a Tobii system or not. That's totally great. We love all eye trackers. Yes, I have in the past, but not currently, a small proportion, and about a quarter of you have not yet. So we have one more poll here asking about blink metrics. So have you used blink metrics in your research? Yes, I do now. I have in the past, but not now, or not yet. Great, and lots of people are asking questions. These are great questions so far. We'll get to those in just a moment. This is great. Okay, I'm going to end this poll here. Looks like we've got a lot of feedback. 70, almost 75% of you have not used blink metrics. So I hope that this has been a really inspirational talk today and that we can get to a lot of your questions. Awesome. Okay, let's get started. So first question for you, Marcus. Can you give some examples of when measuring eye blink dynamics beyond just blink counts and duration could be useful? So some of those amplitude and velocity applications that you discussed.
Sure, I mentioned some examples in the beginning there that, for example, when you in sleepiness research or workload research, that the eye starts or eyelid starts closing a bit more slowly, so everything slows down a bit. So that could be one example of where eyelid velocity, for example, would be a relevant measure.
Awesome. Okay, and I just have a question for you. So I mentioned during my part of the presentation that there are other ways that you can measure blinks, like through EOG or magnetic search coils. What do you think are some of the benefits to using, especially eye tracking, but especially this eye openness measure for blink detection versus other methods?
I think the biggest difference is that, I mean, everyone seems to agree that blinks are associated with or related to the eyelid positions and the eyelid motion. And EOG and using the pupil size signals to classify blinks are all indirect measures of blinks. So if you track the eyelids directly, then you have a direct measure of blinks. So that's, I mean, the main difference, I think.
That's great. And even in the data that you showed, the blink metrics or the blink duration with the EO signal versus the pupil signal were a bit longer. And what more can you say about the robustness of that signal and the accuracy of using the EO measurement versus the pupil diameter?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think it makes perfect sense that the eye openness blinks are a bit longer because the pupil, of course, does not know about the eyelid movements as long. I mean, you only can tell that the eyelid moves when it covers the pupil. And so it makes completely sense that the pupil size blinks have shorter durations than the eyelid blinks simply because the eyelid could start moving before it occludes the pupil.
Yes, it seems like it is a more robust and possibly accurate measure of not only just the duration, but also these eye blink dynamics, as you
Yeah, I
mentioned.
mean it's
So,
a direct measure. I mean, if I could if I could have a wish list, it would have been maybe even better to separately track the upper and lower eyelid, and also where the pupil is in the eye image. Then you can also apply the measures I showed you in the table in the beginning.
awesome. Yeah, great. Okay. Let's get to some of these great questions that are coming in. So let's see. Let me pop this out. This question, I don't know if you have an answer for, but is there any correlation or causation between blink metrics and oxygenation in the medial prefrontal cortex or any other part of the brain? So do you know about blinks in relation to oxygenation in the brain?
No, that doesn't sound like a question. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
Yeah. That's not something I can answer either, but there may be more research online for that particular one. Okay. This person asks if it can help when a person's eyes are moving or blinking abnormally. I think they mean blink metrics. So yes, it was as I mentioned briefly, you can use blink metrics to determine if there are any eye-related or eyelid movement disorders. But I think there are a ton of applications for using blinks to determine abnormal eye movements or blinks. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Do you need the eye openness data to use the algorithm? And for our particular systems, yes, for the spectrum and the fusion. If you don't have one of those hardware products, our other eye trackers won't measure eye openness at this point. So if you want the eye openness data in this particular algorithm, you do have to have either the spectrum or the fusion. I'm not sure if they're, yeah, go ahead, Marcus.
I can add also that on the GitHub page, there is example data from both the spectrum and the fusion that you can play around with. So you don't need your own eye tracker to actually play around and test the algorithm.
Great. Yeah, so you can check that out as well. So there are a couple other questions on here about some of our other eye trackers. At this point, with the Glasses 3, we do not have eye openness data, so this blink algorithm would not be available for that, unfortunately. And there's a question about the 4C eye tracker, which also does not have eye openness data. Now, for those other eye trackers, though, you won't be able to use the eye openness blink detection, but you could use pupil diameter or pupil availability blink detection. Marcus, do you have those as well available still? Pupil algorithms for blinks?
Yeah, I mean it's included in the same GitHub repository. And I mean,
Okay.
if you're interested in rate or durations, the pupil size signal is good enough as my plots showed you also. So you don't necessarily need an eye opener signal if you're just interested in rate and duration, and you let participants sit in the center of the head box so that you record some high data with high quality.
Okay, that's great to know. So for people who are using our wearable Glasses 3, we don't have the eye openness signal for glasses, but you can still use the pupil diameter. And since the eye tracker is more on the face and not moving, you don't have any issues with the Z coordinates of moving eye trackers. So you can use pupil diameter blink metrics that are available on GitHub. Awesome. Great. I see a thumbs up there. Okay. What about participants with glasses? Did you find any issues? Do you have any participants who are wearing glasses in your sample and any issues with that?
We didn't look at that specifically, but I mean, in general, when it comes to glasses and eye tracking, I mean, with the spectrum that I have the most experience with, you can record maybe 9 out of 10 people without a problem, irrespective if they have glasses or contact lenses, just from a normal student sample. And of course, if you have some very specific glasses with really raw, large, strange frames, or bifocal glasses, or something like that, you can have issues.
Yes, and if you are interested in using our Tobii Pro Spectrum or Fusion eye tracker, we do have full metrics reports. Now, as far as I know, that doesn't include the eye openness metrics, but you can see that there is very little impact of either contacts or corrective lenses on the eye tracking. So those are available in our data quality page. I think they're also available on the Tobii Resource Center. If you have a question, you have trouble finding it, you can also just Google Tobii Tobii metrics reports, and it should bring you right to the data quality page. But we have done kind of extensive testing with hundreds of participants wearing contacts, wearing glasses, and there's very, very minimal effect of that on at least the gaze processing. Okay, well, we are getting so many questions. This is great. I'm just trying to filter through everything. Okay, glasses. Blink metrics. Do you know if they're helpful for filtering data loss with EEG? That isn't a question that I'm familiar with, but do you know anything about that, Marcus?
Can you read it again if it's?
Yeah, are blink metrics or is blink data helpful for filtering data loss in EEG?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any that much experience from EEG, but I mean, blinks creates artifacts in the EEG signal. So if you have an external way to know where the blinks are, I mean, you can reject those parts from the EEG record. So that would be one way to use an eye tracker.
Right. I think for many EEG systems, you can also get an EOG or like a face detector. So again, there will be different use cases there for measuring full blink, direct blinks versus indirect blinks. Do you have any insights on blink parameters or metrics used in language research?
Um, Not really. I mean, again, that's not really my field, so I don't really know how they use blinks or if they use blinks at all in that field.
Yeah, I'm not familiar either, but you might, whoever asked the question, you might be able to just look in a search engine and see. Otherwise, it's open for using that type of metric in your research, so it could be very interesting. Let's see. Let me see. Would it be possible to share the specific GitHub repository that you mentioned? Is there a way to either find it or we can possibly send it out with the email?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to find it, you can send it out by an email, but otherwise, just I mean, if you Google me and you'll find it on the publication on my webpage, and in that publication, there's a link to the GitHub page. So
Okay.
I think that would be an easy way to find it.
Yeah. So you can try to search engine it. Otherwise, it might be something that we can send out when we send out the recording link to this. This person asks, is it possible to fuse pupil size data and blinking rate?
I don't know if I understand that question.
I'm not sure what you mean either, Livia. So if you have a follow-up way to ask that, please feel free to clarify what you're asking. Um, okay. I find eye openness can also be helpful to detect if people are especially focusing, confused, or even straining to read, as squinting can be common in these situations. Perhaps it could be used to troubleshoot data quality issues related to eye tracking, to eyes that are too closed, squinting, or droopy lids. So yeah, eye openness, measuring in a variety of states where maybe yeah, you can get all of that eye openness
Yeah.
data with our systems. Oh,
Yeah.
that was from Laurence. Hi, Laurence.
What I can say about data loss and pupil size signals that I mean, if the signal is missing for some reason, it could be because the participant is blinking or because the signal is missing for some other reason. So that's why it could be a good idea to look at the eye opener signals. So you can. There's a way to tell whether the signal is missing because the participant is blinking or some other reason. Uh, so that's one way to use the eye opener signal.
Yeah, great. This question is about the Adobe Pro Fusion, if we have resources or tutorials. Yes, we have a ton. So you can, if you already have Adobe Pro Fusion, you can go to connect.toby.com and you can access a ton of information about that. Um, and we can also help if you have more specific questions about your particular use case, just reach out to us. Let's see. Okay. In eye tracker, data blinks are clearly visible even from X and Y eye position, not only as data loss, but also as movement. Is this an artifact due to pupil occlusion, or is it a real movement associated with blinks?
Yeah, there is a figure in the paper that shows data from different eye trackers, and so they different eye trackers produce different types of artifacts around blinks. Um, in particular, if you have a low frequency eye tracker, uh, you usually don't see these artifacts around the blinks because the sampling frequency is too low. So then a blink just looks like the data just disappears and then reappear after a while. But if you have a high frequency eye tracker, um, then you can usually see this lid closure part also. So the artifact related to that, the pupil will disappear gradually. So it depends on what kind of eye tracker you have and what kind of principle that uses for eye tracking, exactly what the blinks look like in the X and Y uh, traces.
Now, Marcus, I know that you mentioned you used the spectrum for the data collection of
Mm.
this. Remind me, were you running that at 1200 hertz?
It's 600 hertz.
600 hertz. Okay. Um, do you to this point, do you have a recommendation for the speed, a sort of a minimum speed that you would say would be kind of the best for calculating eye openness to then count blinks the most accurately?
Well, I know we know from research on saccades that if I mean, 200 hertz is in theory enough to capture all the movements from saccades, and blinks are in the same ballpark, in the same range. So let's say at least 300 hertz, then you're on the safe side. So I don't think there is any reason to record at 1200 hertz unless you have a very specific reason to do so.
Okay, that's great to know. There's a question here. Hi, Rebecca. For analyzing eye openness data, such as determining different states, squinting, tired, it's up to the experimenter to determine the parameters within collected data. Is that correct? Or do you have recommendations on ways to best collect and report that data?
Well, in terms of the algorithms, I mean, there are a few parameters that are set because, I mean, there is a minimum blink amplitude, for example. So if you're interested in twitch blinks, you probably need to go into the algorithm and change the parameters a bit so it allows the detection of these tiny, tiny eyelid movements. So the parameters as they are in the standard implementation on GitHub right now are tuned based upon what's kind of most common and reasonable from previous literature.
Okay, great. Let's see. Thank you. Some of these questions are great. They are more in the application area, so I'm not sure if we'll be able to answer all of them, but this is a question about have we seen differences in dynamics or metrics, let's say in children with sort of typical vision or atypical vision like amblyopia? Would you measure ocular movements during the blink period, or are there any differences that you can see in some childhood eye diseases, if you know of any?
No, I mean, there are a few examples in the paper, but not any I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay.
And there is this excellent paper also that I talked about in the beginning by Eckstein that goes into more details about blink measures and what they could mean and how they're used in research. So I highly recommend having a look at that paper.
Okay, great. One person said they were able to find the GitHub repository for the eye openness algorithm, but for the glasses 3, you don't have the eye openness measurement. So for the glasses 3, you would need to use the pupil algorithm for blink detection. So I hope that makes sense. That should still be on Marcus's page. Okay, be sure. If these are all the questions that we can get to. Yeah, so make sure if you have specific questions about using blink metrics in your field, you can download Marcus's paper or look at other papers related to blinks to see what exists. You can also check out our Tobii Resource Center for using Tobii.
And if you're interested in eye blinks or eye tracking in general also, I want to advertise this course that we're giving in Lund also that you find on the Tobii webpage. It's a 3-day intensive course in eye tracking for mostly for beginners, where we give you a brief introduction to eye tracking methodology in 3 intensive days.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great course and a great opportunity to go to Sweden and learn from some fantastic researchers. Okay, well, I think most of the questions we've got to. If something else specific that you're interested in was not addressed, feel free to email me directly. It's my first name dot my last name at tobii.com. My last question that I like to ask is, Marcus, what's next for you in your research, and where do you see eye tracking as it relates to the next 10 years? What would be some of your dream features? So tell us about what the future might look like.
Well,
for
I
you
mean, if
and
we
for eye
talk about eye
tracking.
tracking in a more broader context than blinks, I think what's on my wish list is eye trackers with a higher accuracy. So I think that's the holy grail of eye tracking, and at least in a short time perspective, to produce eye trackers with higher accuracy. So by that I mean that if you want the eye tracker to tell you exactly where a person is looking, not roughly where a person is looking, but exactly a person is looking, and that's something very few and very specialized eye trackers can do today, but not general eye tracking. So that's something I would want to see in the future.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marcus, for this fantastic presentation, for all of your work and showcasing how our Tobii existing or prospective customers can use our systems to measure eye openness and interpolate blinks from that. This has been a great amount of questions from everybody, so we hope to see everybody here at another webinar soon. And as always, please reach out if you have any more questions.